All right, welcome to another episode of Middle School Music. I'm one of your co-hosts, Farhan Lalji, and with me, as always, is Dario DeWet. Dario, how you doing this morning?
Good, thank you. We're almost at day 30 of self-isolation, hey?
What day number?
We're almost at day 30. Well, considering we've been working from home for so long.
Yeah, I mean, I think some people were kind of self-isolating and kind of taking the isolation orders even before the government had kind of instrumented kind of the mandatory, kind of work from home if you can orders. So, for us, it's been a little bit longer because I think we're both kind of lucky enough to have like forward-thinking employers who say, hey, guys, this is going to happen. Let's just head it off and start working from home a little bit earlier, right? But yeah, I mean, how are you managing with everything going on?
It's day 28 to be precise. Yeah, good. They're obviously, I think we're lucky here in London so that we can at least walk around outside. Well, at least, should I say, do some exercise. And the weather's turning up. It looks sunny this weekend, so we can stare outside the window in frustration, or at least get some fresh air. But all right. What about you?
Yeah, before we moved into this house, we were looking for a flat or a house to rent. And I had a mandatory number of bathrooms criteria, and my wife had a mandatory outdoor space criteria. And we both kind of were lucky enough to kind of get what we wanted. And I've never been more grateful that we have both of those things right now. And how's your music consumption been going during this lockdown period?
Well, for me, it's been pretty. It hasn't really been affected. If anything, it's gone up because, as you know, that's all I ever really do is just listen to music when I'm working, when I'm not working, whatever I'm doing. But yeah, I mean, I listen to what is kind of interesting though, based on the question, is been listening to all sorts of things. I mean, if you look at it, basically, if somebody were to pull up my Spotify data, they'd be like, "What's up with this guy? Listening to old stuff, new stuff, this genre, that genre. Like, what's going on?" What about you?
Yeah, I mean, it's bizarre and interesting in terms of how my behaviors have changed. I think one of the major things that's impacted my listening is, that time that I had by myself around the commute is no longer there,
Yeah.
right? So I'm missing out, kind of at least, 40 minutes, if not more, a day of kind of prime music listening on my own time. So that stuff, it's starting to impact. And I think like even the types of podcasts and what I'm listening to, that's kind of adapted as well. So I think like I'm starting to kind of feel that I'm not necessarily getting as much access or getting as much time to listen to music. But hey, and that kind of leads us into the one big topic we wanted to cover today, right? Which is kind of behaviors and what's happening with streaming data and kind of the impact of that at a global level. Is that basically kind of how you were thinking what we could cover this week?
Spot on. So what is coronavirus or COVID-19 doing to affect music streaming numbers? We've seen Nielsen put a report out saying that staying put in our homes would lead to almost a 60% increase amount of content we watch. But remember, the emphasis there is on watch and not listen. And we've seen the effects of coronavirus on various chains of the music industry, from agents to songwriters, managers, contractors, and most importantly, artists themselves. Farhan, you and I have covered this extensively in the previous two episodes surrounding the effects on live events.
Yeah.
But it's really now starting or interesting patterns are starting to emerge in terms of music consumption itself.
So Dario, can you tell us a little bit more about like how the agents, maybe the songwriters, the managers and contractors, like how these people are being effective? Because I think some of them are obvious, right? Like artists aren't able to tour, a lot of tour dates being canceled. How do you think kind of this lockdown situation is impacting like agents and songwriters and managers per se?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think for various reasons, when it comes to just booking new performances, when it comes to rollout strategies or execution strategies, new album releases, the various parties that are involved in ensuring that those are a success, whether it be signing new talents or collaborating effectively. Now, I know that we have the power of technology to be able to do so, but it can become increasingly difficult in order to be able to ensure that creative process is perfected by being in a studio together. We've also looked at the effects of all of these parties on the live event space, which I think is particularly important because people tend to forget that live events aren't just about an artist and the event organizer. There are many intermediaries in the way. I think another aspect as well that I want to kind of touch on is on new music releases, and whether people are comfortable with releasing new content. Because we find that when you look at streaming numbers, you'll find that listeners have traditionally been consuming older catalog content during this time as opposed to new content.
Yeah, that's been really fascinating. I think both of you and I were kind of like messaging last week that we didn't think kind of New Music Friday, which typically like has a few standout tracks, but is pretty kind of deep at the top at least. We didn't think that it was that good. And I wonder if this is a more kind of long-term trend where in the same way that in other media, right, like we're seeing Marvel movies and whatnot being pushed back until early parts of next year or later on this year. And I wonder if we're seeing the same thing with kind of artists hesitating to release new music just because they're not going to necessarily be able to tour. They're not necessarily going to be able to monetize it in the same way. And maybe there's some kind of like behaviors where people are kind of waiting to see what the impact is from a streaming perspective. And if they are able to kind of offset some of that lost revenue through streaming uptakes. And if that's not the case, I wonder if artists will be hesitant to release new music.
Completely. I think it's great to see. I don't know. It's so interesting because I find some artists could turn around and use this time to be creative, but it's very easy to sit and say, oh, now that you've got more free time at home, you can make new music or put together a new album. There are many other aspects here that would affect a person's ability to be able to do so, irrespective of your profession, in fact. This pandemic is a serious issue, which everybody is affected by in one way, shape, or form, and others more so than some. Or should I say some more so than others. I kind of want to just focus on the streaming numbers angle, because you kind of found that catalog music streaming consumption has dropped, and I think largely to your point that you focused on is you don't have the commute in the morning anymore. Spotify's prime time, which is typically when people could drive or walk to work or go to the gym, that doesn't happen anymore. You have various members, or should I say people families that live together. Instead of having maybe 4 people in a family that all have separate Spotify accounts listening to music, it's now all kind of consolidated into one account or one device. And those listening preferences change because you have to account for different music tastes or age or other factors involved in kind of the demographic of that family.
Yeah, I can give you my personal kind of experience on that is we've taken the step of having a weekly family playlist. So every Sunday, everybody gets to put on 10 or so songs, and then we just hit that on shuffle when we're all together. Okay. And so you can choose some new music, you can choose some old music, whatever it is. And then we kind of say, okay, Fridays is going to be for new music. So we specifically set out a Friday is going to be, we're going to listen to New Music Friday, we're going to listen to charts, and then Saturday and Sunday is old school days where mommy and daddy get to kind of choose the old school stuff that we're going to listen to. So and that rhythm is hopefully going to kind of pay off, but you're absolutely right in terms of instead of my son listening on his own when my daughter goes to ballet and my wife is commuting to and from work and I'm commuting to and from work, those are a lot of multiple streams off of, one family network that Spotify is no longer getting as a result of the current situation.
It's a great plan. I like it. You raised an interesting thought for me surrounding kind of the change in music preferences during this time. So, I've read that Spotify listeners are actually adding softer songs to their playlists. So kind of more acoustic, less danceable, and lower energy, or the music may tend to be more instrumental or feature more instrumentals. And I don't know if that's because people are in a somber mood. I would have thought maybe the contrary. People would have been more excited to kind of increasing their energy levels. I think something which is something maybe to drill down a bit is actually on the concept of playlisting. I know you and I were discussing this just before this recording.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen an interesting behavior from a lot of my friends in the US and in Canada where they are kind of staying up to watch live performances of DJs. I haven't seen that happening as much in Europe, but DJs like D Nice are becoming really kind of prominent streamers on Instagram Live. And then you've got other kind of more niche or kind of kind of geographically focused DJs. From my hometown, for example, in Toronto, you've got a DJ named Starting from Scratch who was on the come up when I was growing up and is still kind of a radio DJ. And he's doing kind of a nightly mix every other night or so, where people are kind of tuning in on Twitch and kind of seeing him that way. And I wonder if some of the stream kind of numbers are going down as a result of some of these behaviors. So people feel like they're getting their high energy, kind of uplifting kind of beat or dance stuff through these kind of channels, and then they're leveraging kind of the length of the catalog, or if I'm listening by myself or if I'm listening in more of a somber mood, then I'm going to use kind of the streaming networks to kind of pick an acoustic playlist.
It's interesting you say that, because I think when it comes to DJs or dance music, I know I used to have this problem. Like, you'd go to a club back 10 years ago, for example, and kind of prior to streaming services really kicking off, and DJ would play a cool track and you wouldn't really know what it was that they were playing, and you'd have to write it out on your phone and then give them your phone, and they'd probably ignore you, and then they'd try and type it in, and you'd try to find that remix. Is very difficult. I think a lot of the time, which is something that I don't think Spotify has perfected too well as it stands, is actually being able to get remixes of dance tracks. Or a lot of the time DJs would play no ID tracks, so it's difficult to determine what's been released and what hasn't.
Yeah, totally.
On the pop music side of things, they have found a relationship between kind of post live stream and uptake in terms of streams for that artist, which is something quite cool as well.
Yeah, I mean, and I do think that this is impacting kind of the streaming numbers, right? And it's interesting. I wonder if you can maybe tell people a little bit more about how these streams are also being measured, because I think you were mentioning that there's some interesting behaviors and interesting kind of like patterns or interesting kind of steps that people like Spotify take in order and how they do their streaming counts.
Yeah, so the most interesting fact actually is that Spotify discounts streams as non-chart eligible if a user plays a track too many times in 24 hours. So I like basically what it's saying is, if you do weird things like I'm sure you did too. Some of us, you listen to a track and you think it's great, it flags on the system and actually doesn't count that as much when it comes to chart positions. And I don't know if that's a way of getting around kind of this click farm thing, which typically originated in China, where people just loop songs to try and increase viewership or listenership. I don't know. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I wonder where the line is, right? Because you could kind of say that multiple streams, right, are happening as a result of, kind of families, kind of, and I know that my son, for example, if he likes a track, he's going to play it over and over again to try to kind of memorize the words. And similarly, I used to do the same thing with taping off the radio and then going back and, being able to say every word of a certain hip hop song. He's actually doing that with musicals. And right now it's like Dear Evan Hansen that he's kind of playing over and over again and kind of memorizing all the words for. And I'm really curious as to what impact that has on kind of the streaming numbers, because I think there's definitely something around protecting from click farms, but then there's also a fine line between kind of the click farm protection side and just kind of typical user behavior that might be kind of age specific.
It's, I mean, I wonder if that has an effect on the revenue side as well, because I stand to be corrected, but I think artists are remunerated after 30 seconds of a song is played. But I assume the two probably hold a relationship together to try and prevent artists from trying to milk the system on that front. Something which I read, which I kind of find super fascinating, is video on demand streaming surged around 7% in the week ending March 19th. Now, video on demand music streaming, aka music videos. Do we see a comeback of the music video in this climate? And I mean, I love music videos. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I was thinking about that when you were telling me that earlier, because I do wonder if some of that is just because of the revenue model and the customer experience, right? So it's much easier and it's almost impossible for me to kind of play YouTube in my car as I'm kind of going to work. But it's really easy for me to have a tablet or have the TV on and kind of connect that to my sound system and play, kind of music that way at home. So I wonder how much of that is music videos and how much of that is just kind of the availability from a free perspective and the ad revenue kind of for YouTube being the one that kind of makes up how their business model works. And so I wonder if just like families being at home are kind of maybe even there might even be some tightening of the belt, and knowing that your Spotify account costs you more than your YouTube account. And if for right now, you're just going to watch off of videos, that makes it a lot easier. And maybe people are being a little bit more cost conscious around how they spend with regards to music.
Completely. Kind of raises another point where you find that, well, you still do find it, that some artists, take Lil Nas X with Old Town Road, he signed to a label, then all of a sudden they put out this crazy expensive music video, which must have taken, a lot of time to put out there. And then you've got, the other side of the coin where people are putting out TikToks and songs are blowing up in a matter of 15 seconds. So does that kind of change if we do see the reemergence or kind of the spotlight coming back onto the music video space, if we do see kind of a change in the way that music videos are produced and why?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that, kind of, there'll probably be like a barbell, right? Like our boss, Sean Park, loves to kind of talk about barbells from a bond trading perspective. And I do think like even in the music industry, you're likely to kind of see barbells when it comes to the types. So you'll probably see on one end, the up and coming, the kind of breakthrough artists, leveraging social media, leveraging kind of platforms to kind of gain traction. And on the other side, you'll probably see some high cost or high production value with some of the bigger name artists, right? It'll be interesting. We saw actually one of the largest or one of the biggest artists to drop new music was Drake over the last week. Yeah. And I don't believe there's a video yet, or at least I haven't seen it, of the new song. So it'll be interesting to kind of see if he does release kind of a video and then what kind of production that has. I mean, I know the last kind of, or a few of the songs that he's done recently haven't had as high production value from a video perspective. It'll be interesting. And I think that's, between him and people like John Legend and others, Kendrick was another one that we've talked about in the past as, big name artists that are having new music that's going to come out over the summer or just before the summer. It'll be really fascinating to see how they approach kind of the musical video or music video production side.
It's a good point. It's like that Kendrick release kind of seems to have just disappeared. I see, well, on the topic of Drake and Tootsie Roll, I believe there was a TikTok song. It's kind of well positioned for that as well. I think Hotline Bling would have been a great TikTok song as well if it was released now. So
that's true. Yeah, and I think like even Justin Bieber was trying to get "Yummy" to become a TikTok song as well, right? So yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, you're absolutely right that some of these larger artists, larger name or big name artists, will be kind of trying to leverage TikTok as well. But I just wonder how much of that is actually kind of produced TikToks, like almost pay to play.
Yeah,
where, kind of some of these TikTok influencers to create TikTok videos, and how much of it is actually organic.
Yeah. And have you used TikTok yet?
Yeah, I mean, I've been experimenting. I'm more of a consumer than I am a producer.
Yeah.
On TikTok right now. Having a preteen daughter means that she's definitely going to be on TikTok, and her friends are already on TikTok, and they're already talking about different TikTok videos. So we're kind of like dipping our toe in to kind of make sure that the water's the right temperature before we kind of expose her or let her kind of use TikTok in a more kind of involved manner.
Yeah, that's a good idea because it's quite deep. But yeah. that's a conversation for another day.
Totally.
Well, I mean, I guess there's something that kind of also used to focus on. Well, sorry, let me take a step back here. We've seen kind of playlists emerge from a trend perspective for Spotify, where people are focusing on cooking playlists or workout playlists or housework theme playlists, really getting into the mood of what self-isolation or quarantine really is. I was actually going through, so a friend of mine is responsible for kind of putting together two playlists, one a workout playlist and a cooking playlist. And it must be pretty damn challenging to be able to do that, especially on the cooking side, I won't lie.
Yeah, I mean, I guess kind of it really depends on your own kind of experience. I mean, you're a bit of a workout guy, a fanatic of sorts in terms of like taking care of yourself. Do you have like a specific playlist that you use for that activity?
Actually, I actually made my own playlist. I call it The Shrine, which is pretty much just gangster rap. But sometimes I'll like fiddle with some of the Spotify playlists, but I don't really like a lot of the trap stuff. So you look at Get Turned to Rap Caviar. There's Beast Mode, which is actually quite cool because they take the sequencing is quite interesting, and that there are no gaps between the songs, so it's mixed quite well. The problem is it's not updated enough. But we were doing a comparison the other night where we were looking at one specific playlist, and my playlist was completely different to my friends because obviously they choose a pool of, let's say, X thousand or 100 songs, and based on the algorithm will determine what's best suited for you and your listening preferences.
Yeah, I guess, like I've been kind of, and I wonder if, people who've got a vast kind of diverse kind of musical range or music taste, what their playlists are like in the comparison on that. If I'm just looking at my morning run playlist, and there's some Roots, there's some Wale, there's some Kendrick, there's some Sean Paul, but there's also, some Ed Sheeran, there's also some Megan Trainor, and some other kind of artists. And, a lot of these kind of DJs as well, like DJ Snake and Musamara as well is on my playlist. And I'm sure that, none of those would be on yours, and probably none of those would be on your friends' playlist as well. And I guess, we're kind of the outliers on the bell curve, right? Because he's probably producing or looking at kind of a large number, or, kind of if you're trying to kind of do something to get popularity, it's very different to curating something for yourself.
Completely. Dude, you've it's actually quite funny because my playlist is the exact same. It's all over the show.
Yeah.
Sometimes you get one or two things that creep in and you're like, whoa, where did that come from? But I guess it's a good testament to how people's music preferences are no longer stuck in a box.
And on the cooking note side of things, right? Like, I wonder if, how much of that is, when you have that experience of cooking and you like one song, and then, one of the great things I love, and actually my family all kind of love about Spotify, is the ability to do song radio, right? So that kind of discoverability off the back of a song you like, kind of leading you down into rabbit holes. Yeah. Right. I think a lot of that kind of goes into, okay, well, like if I like this song while I'm cooking, right, am I going to like these other songs on that side? So Dario, I mean, I think I wanted to kind of touch on, because you've got some insight onto the playlist, onto the podcast side of things, and us being a podcast, but also I've found that my podcast consumption is changing as well. Just, it feels like, ours included, but almost every podcast is just talking about COVID and coronavirus. So it's really, really difficult to kind of escape and kind of get away from that. And I wonder if people are either kind of diving in or kind of totally avoiding the coronavirus talk. You had some interesting insight on the podcast market. I wonder if you wanted to share some of that.
Yeah, so people were initially listening to news podcasts a lot. Typically, obviously, to cover COVID and people's concerns. I think now, considering the status or the global status of the pandemic and how people feel on a day-to-day being trapped up in their homes, they're probably trying to avoid that. So you started to see a drop-off in actual consumption of news-based podcasts. Overall, though, we have seen a drop in podcast listens. I think, again, it stems from what you've mentioned regarding no longer having a commute or no longer being in the gym. And that has repercussions overall. I think if you look at it on the other side, though, it's very much theme dependent or category dependent, because you'll have people listening to self-help podcasts or something that may involve an activity which you can do at home. Maybe it's more involved on the side of lifestyle and health. But that curiosity to really kind of get time to tick over in your mundane day-to-day kind of downtime per se, whether aka your commute or whatever it may be, is gone. And I think that because people are sitting with their thoughts more, they I don't know. It's difficult. You and I haven't really spoken about this. Again, kind of stemming back to that thing where, oh, because you're at home, you should be doing X, Y, and Z, and you're just lazy if you haven't spent your time doing this or doing that. And somebody could use that debate and say, well, you should be listening to podcasts to upskill yourself instead of listening to, I don't know,
Drake
or whatever, Drake.
Yeah.
But I don't know. What are your thoughts there?
Well, I wonder, I mean, it's a bit of supply and demand, right? So on the demand side, I can see people having more availability, but like you said, or like we've kind of covered earlier, it might be some things around kind of cost. It might be some things around actually like what the podcast material is and people trying to kind of look for an escape. And, it feels like every podcast is talking about this. So it's hard to get that escape. Like if I think about, the coronavirus global update that the BBC has started to produce, that's come as a result of massively scaling back their other podcasts, right? So a lot of people who were working on other podcasts for the BBC have kind of shut down those podcasts for a limited period of time, hopefully, while they focus on kind of getting the nation kind of updates in that way. And I know there's been, kind of a lot less from, even though we've seen, kind of recent changes in the political landscape in the US with Joe Biden now, as a result of late last night, here in the UK being the official kind of Democratic nominee.
Yeah.
I was thinking this morning when I went on for my run that I would see in my, kind of thread or in my playlist kind of list a whole bunch of like news podcasts around that. And really it's still around coronavirus. And that just might be kind of a little bit of a time lag. But it was really interesting for me to kind of see on my personal podcast side. I chose to kind of listen to Kara Swisher's podcast with Scott Galloway on my run this morning, just because that kind of talks about tech and that's a sector that I like. And, while they do kind of cover a lot of coronavirus stuff, they do kind of look at it from a tech lens. I've kind of stayed away from things like Gimlet's Science Versus and, some of the other shows that go deep into the science part, because I just don't feel like I need that much insider information on it. I kind of know what I need to know, which is right now I need to stay home. Right.
Yeah.
And it's like, I don't know how much more value I'm going to get from another podcast kind of talking about coronavirus around the science of it or around kind of the impact or how many deaths are occurring or if we're flattening the curve. Like that stuff to me, I just need a little bit of an injection of the news and then I'm going to stay away. And I don't necessarily feel the supply side is kind of meeting my personal demand on that. You've never really been a podcast listener though yourself, right? Like, I mean, are you kind of dipping your toe in?
Look at me being all controversial, hosting a podcast but not listening. No, I mean, it's very much select few that I listen to. I think it's also mood dependent. I find that I listen to a lot more, because I listen to music a lot. I tend to use Spotify for my music, and then I actually like to watch podcasts on YouTube.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know if that makes much sense.
No, totally. I mean, people like Joe Budden and Joe, what's the other dude?
Academics and all those people.
No, the more popular podcasts, right?
Joe Budden, the pull up season by Joe Budden, and then he got his show as well.
Yeah, and so those guys get like a lot of kind of live stream views. I mean, I think even Howard Stern uses kind of the video media alongside his kind of promotion on kind of mainstream digital radio as well. So we are seeing that kind of pick up as well, and it'll be interesting to see if that continues to be a way people consume media. Like we were saying, like, YouTube versus Spotify around the streaming side. If people do move to more of a video streaming side of things, it'll be interesting to see if Spotify does pivot around that.
Yeah, it's just a pity that artists are paid far less on YouTube. So it makes it even more of a challenging time for them during this time, because they're not making near as much money as they could have on Spotify. Not to say that they were making a lot there anyway, considering the streaming rates are so poor. But that's something we've spoken about before anyway.
Yeah, just to touch on that for any artists or any listeners who haven't, right? A lot of it will come down to kind of like finding alternative revenue channels, right? Because if your streaming revenue was just kind of like almost the marketing payoff for you to kind of make significant revenue off the back of live performances, and if live performances are going away, you're going to need to kind of find alternatives, right? And I think that's why you're seeing a lot of artists dipping their toe on the live streaming of kind of more intimate. And now when I say intimate, I'm still talking about like 1 million people watching at the same time or so. with kind of the stay at home kind of streaming stuff that's happening, it'll be interesting to see if more artists try to monetize that. But we've talked about that in the past.
Cheapers. Well, the complexities behind royalties and monetization on the back of that is a whole nother story. And I don't think the industry's even discovered how to deal with that right now. Something I was reading over the week. Anyway, I mean, have you heard of any cool kind of music that's being released this week, considering things have been relatively quiet?
No, I mean, as I mentioned, kind of the only thing that kind of caught my eye was the 2C Slide Drake track. Actually, Frank Ocean released a bunch of music as well. Like ever since Channel Orange, though, like I don't necessarily feel like I'm vibing with everything he's done. Like I think, he waited a good few years between kind of Channel Orange and Blonde. And now, again, it's been a few years and, I don't necessarily feel like Frank Ocean, I don't know where he is from an emotional perspective or a music making perspective, but I'm kind of sad to say that, I don't think he's touched anywhere near the level that Channel Orange was. Otherwise, kind of The Weeknd. Now I've been kind of trying to dig my head into the rest of The Weeknd's stuff. I've been, for the last few months, as you know, a little bit, I've been, digging kind of the reggaeton kind of Latin vibe. So, there's a couple of artists, Carol G in particular, who's launched some new music as well. So I've been listening to a bit of her. What about you?
Well, it seems like from a new release perspective, as it stands this week, I think only Lady Gaga is really dropping tomorrow. That's on the pop side of things. From a listening perspective, for me, I'm just listening to Russ all the time. I love Shake the Snow Globe. I think it's a great album. It's a perfect length. You can just replay it. I'm one of those guys who replays it too much in 24 hours and then he doesn't get the money. Kind of also been fiddling with some of the old catalog sort of stuff as well. Whether it be kind of Limp Bizkit, for example. I don't know why. I was just like walking the other day and I thought, well, why not just listen to them? I don't even think they do anything anymore. They last signed Young Money in 2012 with Gold Cobra. Listening to some Big Sean. Otherwise, not kind of flicking around here and there, some dance music with Fisher, a couple other things. But hopefully coming out of this, we'll see a storm of new music and everything will be thriving. And I think people won't have enough money to be able to go to all these concerts.
Well, I mean, it's really interesting to kind of see how things are going to evolve, right? Because I think if, kind of the price points come down and it's more intimate and it's more live stream, kind of watch at home type stuff, then hopefully people will still participate and artists will still be able to monetize that way. But you're right. I mean, I think this is a pivotal time for the music industry and will be really, really interesting to see how things wrap up from kind of like, moving from, I think if you think about it historically, right, almost 100 years ago, going to the theater or going to a concert was really something of a rich kind of wealthy class kind of thing. And then it did become something that the masses were able to participate in somewhat, right? Now, whether that changes and becomes something again that only the wealthy can do. I mean, we've all heard the stories of, Beyonce being paid high 6, low 7 kind of figures to maybe do a bar mitzvah or something like that. If that becomes a thing again, or if it becomes something that, kind of artists kind of choose to make music for the masses and do it over digital channels. I'm really fascinated to kind of see how the music industry evolves and how, kind of this will definitely impact the music industry like it impacts almost every other industry as well.
It's funny you say that. Kind of reminds me of our crystal ball episode for what we were expecting for 2020. I definitely don't think that this was on the cards. No. But it wasn't for anybody.
Definitely.
Cool. Well, that's episode 6 of season 2.
Wow, man. We've done a lot of these podcasts. Keep please giving us feedback. We are going to experiment over this period of time with some new formats, and hopefully you'll like what you hear, but please do give us feedback, rate, and kind of give us that feedback over, our Twitter channels. You can find us on Twitter on @middleschool_music. That's @MDLSKL_music. You can find me on Twitter @Farhan Lalji. And Dario, where can the good listeners find you?
You can find me on Twitter on @Dario_Debate.
All right. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time. Ciao.
All right, ciao.